His assistant called on a Thursday morning. Not my father. His assistant. A woman named Petra who introduced herself with the careful professionalism of someone who has been told to make a call they are not entirely comfortable making. She said she was reaching out on behalf of Mr Adell. She said he would like to schedule a meeting at my earliest convenience. She said he hoped I was well. I was sitting at my desk on the 14th floor of a building I had chosen specifically because it had the kind of view that reminded you every morning of how far you had come. I was 34 years old. I had not spoken to my father in 7 years. I said, "What is the meeting regarding?" Petra said she was not at liberty to discuss the specifics but that Mr Adell felt a conversation was overdue. I said, "Tell Mr Adell I will consider his request and respond within the week." She said she would pass that along. I put the phone down. I sat for a long moment looking at the view I had chosen specifically for mornings like this one, mornings when I needed to remember exactly who I was and exactly how I had gotten here. My name is Mr Adell. I was 27 years old when my father cut me off without warning or explanation. I was 34 when his assistant called to ask if I would see him. And I was the one who decided if he got the meeting. I need to tell you who my father was before I tell you what he did. Because the story does not make sense without that context and because understanding him is the only way to understand what his silence cost and what my silence built. Mr Adell was 61 at the time of Petra's call. He had spent 40 years building a commercial real estate empire that was the dominant name in our city's property market. He was known and respected in the specific way that comes from decades of being the largest presence in a room, the person whose opinion shaped outcomes before the meeting began. He was also the most conditional man I have ever known. His love was conditional. His approval was conditional. His presence in your life was conditional on your performance, on whether you were doing the thing he had decided was the right thing and doing it in the way he had decided was the right way. I had grown up understanding this. My older brother Dario had grown up accepting it. The difference between us was that I had spent 27 years believing that if I simply met the conditions clearly enough he would eventually love me without them. I had been wrong about that. And the morning he cut me off proved it with a completeness that removed any remaining doubt. The morning of the cutting off was an ordinary Saturday in October. I had driven to my parents' house for what I believed was a family lunch. My mother Celestine had called me on Thursday to confirm. She had asked me to arrive by noon. She had sounded slightly careful on the phone in the way she sounded when something had been decided that she had not been party to deciding. I arrived at noon. The house was quiet in a way that family houses are not quiet when lunch is being prepared. No sound from the kitchen. No smell of food. My mother met me at the door with an expression I had never quite seen on her face before, a combination of apology and helplessness and the specific grief of a woman who has watched a decision being made and has been unable to stop it. I said, "What is happening?" She said, "Your father wants to speak with you." I found him in his study. He was sitting behind his desk the way he always sat when he wanted the conversation to have a particular power dynamic, formal, elevated, the posture of someone conducting a professional meeting rather than speaking to his daughter. He told me he had decided to restructure his financial support of my life. He said he had been observing my choices for some time and had concluded that continuing to provide financial assistance was enabling a direction he could not endorse. He said he was withdrawing all support effective immediately. He said the decision was final. I asked what I had done. He said, "You know what you have done." I did not know. I have never known. That is the truth I have carried for 7 years. What I had done, as best I could reconstruct it, was refuse him. 6 weeks before the Saturday in October I had been offered a position at Marcus's firm. Not entry level. A senior role that would have placed me inside his empire with his name above mine and his authority shaping every decision I made. I had declined. Not rudely. Not with a speech or a declaration. I had simply said that I had my own professional path and that I was grateful for the offer but did not feel it was the right fit for where I was building toward. He had said nothing at the time. He had nodded. He had moved the conversation to something else and I had driven home believing the matter was settled. It was not settled. What I had done by declining was the one thing Mr Adell's world did not have a category for. I had looked at what he was offering and decided it was not enough. Not the money or the title or the prestige. Not enough because it came with the condition that everything I built would be built inside his structure, under his name, according to his vision of what my professional life should be. I had chosen my own vision instead. And he had responded the only way he knew how to respond to a person who declined his terms. He had removed himself. I drove home from the Saturday lunch that was not a lunch and I sat in my flat for the rest of the weekend. I want to be honest about those 2 days. I was not fine. The composed, steady person I am telling you about now was not fully present in that flat on that Saturday and Sunday. What was present was a 27-year-old woman who had loved her father imperfectly and conditionally but genuinely for her entire life and who had just had that love handed back to her with a receipt for the conditions it had failed to meet. I cried. Considerably. The specific grief of someone who has always suspected that the love they were receiving was conditional and has now received the confirmation they did not want. I called my closest friend Bex. She came over on Sunday morning and sat with me through the worst of it and said nothing that tried to fix what could not be fixed and everything that acknowledged what it was. On Sunday evening she said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "The only thing I can do." She said, "Which is?" I said, "Prove him wrong with something he cannot argue with." She said, "And what is that?" I said, "A company he cannot take credit for. A reputation he cannot attach his name to. A life so completely built by my own hands that there is no version of the story where he is part of how it happened." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Then you should start on Monday." I started on Monday. The company I built was called Meridian Property Advisory. The name was deliberate. My father's company was built on acquisition and development, the physical building of things. Mine was built on strategy and counsel, the thinking that precedes the building. We occupied adjacent spaces in the same industry and I had chosen that adjacency deliberately. Not to compete with him. To demonstrate something. That the thinking he had never valued in me, the strategic, analytical, long-view thinking that he had dismissed as impractical because it did not produce immediate visible results, was precisely the thinking that the industry needed most and was least able to find. I started with one client. A mid-sized property developer named Holt who had been making decisions based on incomplete market analysis for 3 years and whose portfolio showed the specific patterns of someone who trusted instinct over evidence. I spent 2 months producing an analysis of his portfolio so thorough it changed his strategy for the following 5 years. He referred me to 2 colleagues. Those 2 colleagues referred me to 3 more. By the end of my first year I had 11 clients and a reputation in the sector for the kind of work that did not announce itself but produced results that did the announcing for it. By the end of my 3rd year I had 28 clients and my first employee. By the end of my 5th year my company was producing work that industry publications were covering without me having sought the coverage. By the end of my 6th year Mr Adell's company had lost 3 major clients to developers whose strategic decisions had been shaped by my firm's analysis. He did not know that last fact when Petra called. I did. My mother had maintained contact throughout the 7 years. Not openly. Not in a way that defied Marcus, she was not built for open defiance of him, which was its own kind of grief that I had learned to accept rather than resent. But consistently. In the quiet, careful way of a woman who has decided that the relationship with her daughter is worth the cost of maintaining it in the spaces her husband was not occupying. She called every Sunday evening. We talked about ordinary things, her garden, her friends, the family news that reached her from Dario and his wife. She did not mention Marcus, and I did not ask. We had established an unspoken agreement about the shape of what was possible between us, and we maintained it with the specific care of people who know the alternative is losing each other entirely. She knew about Meridian. She knew about the clients and the employees and the industry coverage. She said very little about any of it directly. Again, the careful management of information in a household where information was power and power was controlled. But occasionally she said things that told me she was watching. In my 4th year she said, "Your work is being talked about." In my 5th year she said, "Someone mentioned your company to your father at a dinner." In my 6th year she said, "He has been asking Dario questions about what you are doing." And in the week before Petra's call she said, carefully, precisely, in the tone she used when something significant needed to be communicated without being stated directly, "Your father has been thinking about some things." I said, "I see." She said, "I thought you should know." I said, "Thank you." I spent 4 days considering whether to grant the meeting. Not because I was uncertain about my own position. I was entirely certain about my own position. I spent those 4 days examining the question from every angle I could identify, professional, personal, strategic, emotional, with the thoroughness I applied to client problems when the stakes were high enough to require it. The professional case for meeting him was straightforward. Marcus Adell's network was the most extensive in our sector. A repaired relationship with him, even a partial, professional one, would open doors that remained closed to Meridian because of our association. Several of the clients I most wanted were inside his orbit. The professional case against was equally straightforward. A meeting on his terms, accepted on his timeline, after 7 years of his silence, would signal something about the power dynamic that I was not prepared to signal. The personal case was more complicated. He was my father. 70 years old. The assistant's call was the first time in 7 years he had reached across the distance he had created. That meant something. I was not certain what it meant, but it meant something. And my mother was in that house. Still managing the space between his world and mine. Still calling on Sunday evenings. Still carrying something I had never asked her to carry. On the 4th day I called Bex. I said, "I am going to give him the meeting." She said, "On what terms?" I said, "Mine. Entirely mine." She said, "Good. Where?" I said, "My office. My building. My floor." She said, "And if he says no to that?" I said, "Then he does not get the meeting." I had Petra's number from her call. I called her back on the Friday morning. I said, "I am prepared to meet with Mr. Adell. I have one condition. The meeting takes place at my offices at Meridian Property Advisory. I can offer a Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon in 3 weeks' time." Petra was quiet for a moment. Then she said she would convey the message and respond within 24 hours. She called back in 4. She said Mr. Adell accepted the terms. I thanked her. I ended the call. I sat at my desk and looked at the view for a long moment. Then I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. I said, "He accepted the meeting." She was quiet in the way she was quiet when something had arrived that she had been waiting for without quite admitting she was waiting. She said, "How do you feel?" I said, "Ready." She said, "You have always been ready." He simply could not see it. I said, "He will see it on Tuesday in 3 weeks." She said, "I know." Then she said something she had not said directly in 7 years. She said, "I am proud of you." I should have said it more. I should have said it louder. I am sorry I was not braver about saying it. I sat with those words for a long time after we hung up. They mattered more than the meeting. The 3 weeks between the call and the meeting were the most productive of my professional life. Not because I was preparing for the meeting, I was not preparing for it in the way of someone who needs to be ready. I was already ready. I had been ready for 7 years. What the 3 weeks produced was the particular energy of someone who has been building towards something for a long time and can finally see the specific date on which the building will be visible. I finished a major analysis for a client that I had been working on for 6 weeks. It was the most comprehensive piece of work Meridian had produced, a full strategic assessment of a regional market that identified opportunities 3 of our competitors had missed entirely. The client received it and called me within 2 hours to say it was the finest analysis he had seen in 20 years of the industry. I hired my 7th employee, a young analyst named Cora who had the specific quality I always looked for in a hire. She noticed things other people missed and was not yet sure how valuable that was. Meridian's job was to show her. I had 3 new client conversations that converted into contracts. And on the Monday before the Tuesday meeting I sat in my office after everyone had gone home and I looked at what 7 years had built. 14 clients. 7 employees. A reputation that had grown entirely through the quality of the work and the word of the people it had served. A company that bore my name and nobody else's. I thought about the Saturday in October. About his study. About the desk he had sat behind. Tomorrow he would sit across from me at mine. He arrived 7 minutes early. I know because my assistant Priya told me when he arrived in reception and I had specifically asked her to note the time. 7 minutes early was information. It told me he was not treating this as a meeting where his natural authority set the terms. He had arrived early the way someone arrives to a meeting where they are not certain of their standing. I let him wait for 5 minutes. Not to punish him. To establish something clearly before either of us spoke a word. Priya brought him up at 2 o'clock exactly. She showed him into my office and offered him water and closed the door behind her with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood the weight of the room she was leaving. He looked different. 7 years had aged him in the way that 7 years age everyone, but there was something beyond the physical aging. Something reduced in the certainty that had always been his most consistent characteristic. He looked at my office, the view, the work on the walls, the evidence of what had been built here, with an expression I had never seen on his face in 27 years of being his daughter. He looked uncertain. He sat down across from my desk. I said, Marcus. Not Dad. Not Father. Marcus. The same way he had called me by my full name in his study 7 years ago when he had wanted the conversation to have a particular power dynamic. He understood immediately. He said, Soleil. Thank you for agreeing to see me. He talked for a long time. I let him. I had always been a listener. It was one of the qualities he had dismissed as passive when I was growing up and that had turned out to be one of the most powerful tools in my professional life. Listening fully, without preparing your response while the other person is still speaking, produces a quality of understanding that shapes every conversation that follows. He said he had been thinking about the 7 years. He said he had watched what I was building from a distance, the coverage, the reputation, the clients that had come from his orbit to mine. He said he had watched and had felt, in the watching, something that had taken him a long time to name. He said, pride. He said it with the specific difficulty of a man for whom the word cost something significant to say out loud. He said he had been wrong about the job offer. That declining it had not been ingratitude or defiance. It had been clarity, a clarity he had not been able to recognize at the time because it looked like rejection, and rejection was not something Mr Adell had learned to receive well. He said he had cut off the relationship because he had not known what to do with a daughter who could see further than he could and had chosen to build in that direction rather than in his. He said, I did not know what to do with you. So I removed myself. And I have spent 7 years understanding what that cost. I listened to all of it. Then I said, I know. I want to tell you what I said to him. Because this is the part of the story that matters most and I want to say it precisely. I said, Marcus, I am going to tell you some things and I need you to hear them fully before you respond. He said, I am listening. I said, you cut me off without explanation on a Saturday morning because I declined a job offer. You sat behind your desk and told me your decision was final and you did not ask a single question about what I was building or why I had made the choices I had made. You simply withdrew. For 7 years. He said, I know. I said, in those 7 years I built a company that now advises 14 clients. 7 of them are in your sector. 3 of them came to me after working with developers whose strategic positioning was shaped by my firm's analysis that led those developers to outperform your company's competing projects in the same markets. He looked at me. I said, you sat across from me 7 years ago and decided my direction was not worth your support. I want you to understand that your support was never the thing that made my direction possible. Your withdrawal was. He was very still. I said, I am not telling you this to wound you. I am telling you because you asked for this meeting and I believe honest meetings require honest foundations. And the honest foundation of this one is that everything I have built I built without you. That is not a wound. That is simply true. He said, I know. And I am sorry. If this story is hitting something real for you right now, hit subscribe. I post every Sunday and I do not want you to miss what comes next. The silence after I am sorry lasted a long time. Not an uncomfortable silence. The silence of something that has been said that required saying and that both people in the room needed a moment to sit inside. I looked at him. He looked at the desk between us. Then he said, I came here for 2 reasons. I said, tell me both. He said, the first is personal. I came to say what I said. To acknowledge what I did and what it cost. Not to ask for anything in return. Simply because it needed to be said and I have been a man who did not say the necessary things for too long. I said, and the second? He said, professional. There is a project. A significant one. A development in the Eastern District that requires the kind of strategic analysis that my internal team has told me they cannot produce at the level the project demands. He paused. He said, someone on my board suggested Meridian. Before they knew my connection to it. They suggested it based purely on the firm's work in the sector. I sat with that for a moment. The specific satisfaction of a recommendation made without my father's knowledge of the recommender's connection to him, a recommendation made entirely on merit, entirely on the work, entirely independent of the relationship that had produced the firm in the first place. I said, send me the project brief. He said, you will consider it? I said, I will assess it on its merits. As I assess every project. If Meridian is the right fit, we will proceed professionally. If we are not, I will tell you why. He said, that is fair. I said, it is how I work. He left my office at 3:47. 1 hour and 47 minutes. The longest conversation we had had in 7 years and the first one where neither of us was performing a role we had been assigned by the structure of our relationship. Priya showed him out. She came back to my office and looked at me with the careful attention of someone who has understood more about the afternoon than she was told. She said, all right? I said, yes. Send the project brief to the analysis team when it arrives. She said, the personal part first. I looked at her. She said, you look like someone who has just finished something very long and very heavy. The project brief can wait 20 minutes. I said, 20 minutes. She left. I sat in my office alone and I let myself feel the full weight of the afternoon. Not the professional part, that was straightforward, a potential project to be assessed on its merits like every other. The personal part. The hour and 47 minutes of my father sitting across from a desk that bore my name in a building I had chosen and a view I had earned, and saying the words he had spent 7 years not saying. I had not needed those words to build what I had built. But I had needed them in the way that people need honest accounting, not to change the past but to make the present something other than a negotiation with it. He had said, "I am sorry." I had heard it. That was enough to begin something new. Not to restore what had been. To begin something new. The project brief arrived on Thursday morning. It was significant. A development in the Eastern District that represented the largest single project my firm had ever been approached about, the kind of engagement that would require 6 months of intensive analysis and would produce work that shaped a major development in the city's fastest-growing area. I called my senior analyst Dex into my office. I showed him the brief. He read it. He looked up. He said, "This is the Mr Adell project." I said, "Yes." He said, "The Mr Adell who?" I said, "Yes." Assess it on its merits. I want your honest view of whether we are the right firm for this engagement and whether this engagement is right for us. He looked at me for a moment with the specific perception of someone who understands they are being asked to evaluate something that has layers they have not been told about. He said, "I will have an assessment by Monday." He came back on Monday with 12 pages. The conclusion was clear. Meridian was the right firm. The project required exactly the capabilities we had spent 7 years building. The engagement would be good for our clients because it would require us to develop methodologies we would then apply across our existing portfolio. The terms proposed were fair. He said, "There is one thing." I said, "Tell me." He said, "This project will put Meridian into a different category. The work we produce here will be the work people cite when they describe what this firm does. It is a different scale of visibility." I said, "I know." He said, "Is that what you want?" I said, "It is what we have been building toward." He said, "Then I recommend we proceed." I called my mother on the Sunday after the meeting. She answered on the first ring. She had not done that before. She always answered on the second or third ring, the measured response of someone who did not want to appear to have been waiting. She had been waiting. I told her about the meeting. Not the professional part, the personal part. What he had said. What I had said. The silence after "I am sorry." The 1 hour and 47 minutes. She listened without speaking. When I finished she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "He told me about it when he came home. He told me what you said to him. About the 7 years. About building without his support." I said, "And?" She said, "He sat at the kitchen table for a long time after he told me. He did not say anything for a while. And then he said something I have not heard him say in 40 years of marriage." I said, "What did he say?" She said, "He said he had raised a daughter who was better than him. He said it like it was the most important thing he had ever understood. And then he went to bed." I sat with that for a long time. He had raised a daughter who was better than him. Not the daughter he had tried to shape. The daughter who had refused to shape and built her own. The project took 8 months. Meridian produced an analysis that reshaped the development strategy in ways that Marcus's internal team had not anticipated and that 3 independent reviewers described as the most rigorous strategic assessment they had seen applied to a development of this scale in the sector. The project was cited in 2 industry publications. One of them described Meridian as the leading independent advisory firm in the regional property market. Dex had been right. It put us in a different category. 3 new clients approached us in the month the publications ran. All 3 had read the coverage. All 3 specifically cited the Adell project as evidence of the firm's capability. Marcus and I had a professional relationship throughout the 8 months that was exactly what I had said it would be at the Tuesday meeting. Entirely professional. Assessed on merit. The daughter and the father operating in the same industry with the specific respect of two people who understand each other's capability because they have seen it at close range. Once, in the 5th month, he said something that was not professional. We were reviewing a section of the analysis in his conference room. Something I had written. He read it slowly. Then he looked up. He said, "I would have been lucky to have you in my firm." I said, "I know." He looked at me. I said, "So would I." But Meridian needed to be Meridian. He said, "Yes. I understand that now." We went back to the analysis. Dario called me in the 6th month of the project. My older brother. The one who had grown up accepting Marcus's conditions where I had grown up refusing them. We had maintained a careful, warm, slightly cautious relationship through the 7 years, the relationship of two people who love each other and have made fundamentally different choices about the same parent and have decided that those different choices do not have to cost them each other. He said, "I need to tell you something." I said, "Tell me." He said, "Dad talks about you differently now." Since the meeting. Since the project started. I said, "Differently how?" He said, "Like you are someone he respects. Not like a daughter he is managing. Like someone he respects." I sat with that. He said, "I want you to know something." I stayed. I took the job. I have been inside his firm for 15 years. And I have always known that you made the right choice. I said, "Dario." He said, "Let me finish. I have wanted to say this for 7 years. You made the right choice. What you built is what the right choice looks like. I needed you to hear me say it." I said, "Thank you." He said, "You are welcome." Then he said, "He knows too. He just needed 7 years and a meeting in your office and 8 months of watching your firm work to understand it." I said, "I know." He said, "Better late than never." I said, "Yes. Better late than never." The industry award came in my 8th year. A significant one. The kind of recognition that arrives when a firm has been building quietly long enough that the quiet has accumulated into something the industry cannot continue to overlook. It was awarded at a dinner that Dex and Cora and 3 other members of the team attended. We sat at a round table and ate well and talked about the work and laughed at the things that deserve laughter, and I gave a short speech that said the true things. I thanked the team first. Then the clients who had trusted us when we were smaller. Then Bex, who had come over on a Sunday morning 7 years earlier and said the thing that needed saying. Then my mother, whose Sunday calls had been the constancy underneath everything. I did not thank my father. Not from bitterness. He was not the reason for what was in the room that evening. He was not in the lineage of the people who had made it possible. His absence from the first 7 years was his and his alone, and I was not going to revise that history for the comfort of a speech. But he was in the room. He had come. Not as my father, there was no family table, no parental seat. He had come as a professional figure in the sector to an industry dinner where a firm he had a professional relationship with was receiving recognition. And when the award was announced and my name was called and I walked to the stage, I looked out at the room and I saw his face. He was not clapping harder than anyone else. He was simply sitting in the specific stillness of someone who is feeling something significant and does not yet know what to do with it. He was looking at me the way I had wanted him to look at me my entire life. I gave my speech. I walked back to my table. I did not look at him again. I did not need to. After the dinner he found me near the door. The room was thinning. People were retrieving coats and saying goodbyes, and the particular wind down of an evening that had been successful was moving through the space. He appeared beside me. He said my name. I turned. He said, "I watched you give that speech." I said, "I know." I saw you. He said, you did not thank me. I said, no. He said, I understand why. I said, I thought you might. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, I want you to know something. I know I am not in the lineage of this. I know that what happened in that room tonight is not something I contributed to. I am aware of that. I said, good. He said, but I want you to know that whatever I feel watching you, whatever this is that I have been feeling since the Tuesday meeting, since the project, since tonight, I believe the word for it is the one I said in your office. I said, pride. He said, yes. Unearned. Entirely unearned on my part. But real. I looked at him. I said, I know it is real. I can see it. He said, is that enough? I thought about Sunday mornings with Bex. About Monday mornings at a desk in a company that bore my name. About 14 clients and 7 employees and a view I had chosen specifically for mornings when I needed to remember how far I had come. I said, it is a beginning. He said, I will take a beginning. I said, I know you will. I picked up my coat. I said good night. I walked out into the evening. My mother called the following morning. Early. Before 7. She had not called before 7 in 8 years of Sunday evenings. She said, he came home last night and sat at the kitchen table again. I said, and? She said, he sat there for a long time. And then he said your name. Just your name. And then he said, I nearly missed it all. I sat with that sentence. She said, I thought you should hear it. I said, yes. Thank you. She said, are you all right? I said, yes. More than all right. She said, good. Come for dinner on Sunday. Both of you, you and Bex. I said, we will be there. She said, I will make the things you like. I said, you always do. We said goodbye. I put the phone down. I sat in my kitchen in the early morning with coffee and I thought about 7 years. About the Saturday in October and the study and the desk and the 5 words. About Monday mornings and 12 pages of analysis and a view chosen for specific mornings and a company that bore only my name. About a man sitting at a kitchen table saying I nearly missed it all. He had nearly missed it. He had not missed it entirely. That distinction mattered. Not for him. For me. Because I was not a person who needed his recognition to know what she had built. But I was a person who could receive it honestly when it arrived without performing either gratitude or indifference. I received it honestly. That felt right. I want to tell you about the professional outcome because I think it matters for the full picture. Meridian Property Advisory is in its 9th year. We have 19 clients. 11 employees. A reputation that is cited consistently as the standard for independent strategic advisory work in the regional property market. We have worked with Mr Adell's firm 3 times since the Tuesday meeting. Each engagement has been assessed on its merits and has proceeded on professional terms. He is a client. Not my father who is a client. A client who happens to be my father. The distinction is one we have both learned to maintain and it has made the professional relationship work precisely because neither of us has confused it with the personal one. The personal relationship is separate and slower and more careful. Dinners. Occasional calls. The gradual, careful work of 2 people who know each other well in the old way and are learning each other again in a new one. It is not the relationship I would have had if none of this had happened. That relationship, the uncomplicated father-daughter one built on continuous presence and mutual understanding, is not available. It was not available from the Saturday in October and it cannot be retrieved. What is available is this. A man in his late 60s who sat in my office and said I am sorry and meant it. Who sat at his kitchen table and said I nearly missed it all. Who looks at me now with an expression I recognize as the one I had wanted my whole life. It arrived late. It arrived. Bex came to Sunday dinner at my mother's house. She had been to that house before, years ago, in the time before the Saturday in October, when Sunday dinners were family occasions. She had not been back since. She sat at the kitchen table where my mother had prepared the things she knew I liked. Dario was there with his wife. Marcus was there at the head of the table in the specific place he had always occupied. The dinner was not uncomplicated. There was a quality to it of people navigating something carefully, the awareness of a history that had not been fully resolved and the simultaneous awareness that the attempt to sit at the table together was itself a form of resolution. But there was also laughter. Real, surprised laughter at something Dario said in the middle of the meal that caught everyone off guard. The specific laughter that only happens when people who know each other well are reminded of why they knew each other in the first place. Marcus laughed. I watched him laugh and I thought about what Dario had said on the phone. He talks about you like someone he respects. Not like a daughter he is managing. Like someone he respects. After dinner Bex and I walked back to my car together. She said, "How was that?" I said, "Complicated." "Good." "Both." She said, "That is the honest answer." I said, "Yes." She said, 8 years ago you told me you were going to build something he could not take credit for." I said, "Yes." She said, "And?" I said, "And I did." She said, "And now?" I thought about the table. The laughter. The man at the head of it looking at me across the food and the years with something new in his face. I said, "And now we see what comes next." She said, "I think that is the right answer." I said, "I think so too." People ask me sometimes what I would say to the 27-year-old sitting in her flat on a Saturday evening having just been cut off without explanation by the man she had spent her whole life trying to be enough for. I would say, Monday is coming. Start then. Not next week. Not after the grief has fully resolved. It will not fully resolve on any timeline you can plan around. Not after you feel ready, you will not feel ready. On Monday. With whatever you have. With the 2 bags and the resolution and the specific determination of someone who has just been shown clearly and finally the terms of the conditional love she has been receiving. Start on Monday. I would say, you are going to build something over the next 7 years that he will not be able to take credit for. Every day of those 7 years will be evidence that the thing he withdrew was never what made you possible. That you were always possible. That his support had been convenient and his withdrawal was clarifying, and what the clarification revealed was that you did not need either. I would say, he will call eventually. Not from weakness. From the specific awakening that comes to people who have made significant errors when the evidence of those errors has accumulated long enough to be impossible to argue with. He will call. And you will be the one who decides whether he gets the meeting. Be ready for that moment. Not with a speech. Not with the performed composure of someone who has rehearsed their response. With the genuine steadiness of a person who built something real and knows exactly what it cost and what it is worth. That steadiness is the only thing you need to bring to that meeting. It will be enough. My name is Mr Adell. My father cut me off without warning on a Saturday in October when I was 27 years old. 7 years later his assistant called to schedule a meeting. I was the one who decided if he got it. He got it. And what we built after that was something neither of us could have built before it.